On behalf of the Alliance of Civil Society Organizations of Tigray, or ACSOT, which is a multi-sectoral consortium of 72 national and regional civil society organizations operating in Tigray, Mekelle University College of Law and Governance, which is the co-organizer of this workshop, and Wall of Hope, which is the sponsoring organization of this event. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this important workshop that discusses on identifying resources for the recovery and rehabilitation of Tigray. We have many reasons to conduct this workshop today. First, we are discussing the issue of recovery and rehabilitation after passing through difficult time for the last 2 or more years. It's undeniable that the bloody armed conflict of the past 2+ years has resulted in a multitude of devastating effects on the people of the region and their institutions in the public, private, and the civil society sectors. And Tigray cannot wait more to see comprehensive recovery and rehabilitation programs, including massive return programs, to be implemented as soon as possible. Secondly, even if humanitarian supply into Tigray has continued to improve following the signing of the cessation of hostilities, we all can agree that the demand by far exceeds that of the supply. One of the things we all should do in this regard, therefore, is we should double our efforts and continuously advocate for more and more supplies to come in and reach out millions who are waiting for the badly needed humanitarian assistances. Thirdly, local civil society organizations, otherwise known as national or local NGOs, even if they manage to design relevant programs because they know the local context as they are part of the social fabric, they have not been receiving enough resources to implement their programs, and all stakeholders, including donors, UN agencies, INGOs, and government actors, should strive to change this trend as part of their 2016 and 2019 localization commitments and on account of so many other benefits such as comparative operational cost advantage and sustainability imperatives. Fourthly, local responders, including local CSOs, are supposed to support the ongoing peace building, transitional justice, democratization processes, and wide range of advocacy efforts in the region, but they are facing series of financial and technical capacity gaps, which need to be addressed as soon as possible so that they remain in the equation and serve their constituencies. These all needs and programs require billions of resources, and all national and international state and non-state actors in the public, private, and civil society sectors should strive to mobilize as much resources as possible, and they should do this in a coordinated manner. We believe that this workshop will shed light on this process, but is simply the beginning of many future initiatives that should be implemented in collaboration with relevant government and non-governmental organizations in the region and beyond. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, as we tried to highlight on the invitation letters we just sent to you all, the workshop aims at enhancing Tigray local responders' capacities for effective humanitarian response and rehabilitation and reconstruction programs, and thereby contribute towards transparent, participatory, coordinated, and effective resource mobilization and utilization processes. We believe that these are the business of all stakeholders, including donors, UN agencies, international NGOs, and government stakeholders here and away. We are mindful of the fact that many of you have joined us physically or virtually today, leaving your busy schedules behind. This shows your commitment to respond to Tigray's humanitarian recovery and rehabilitation needs and to address the goals of achievement of the goals of this workshop. We really thank you for coming and joining us. Finally, I would like to invite Mr. Awad Awakar, who is the head of UN OCHA, Tigray Regional Coordination Office, to make a brief opening speech. I thank you all.
Thank you, Yarid. The senior government officials here present, the bureau heads, members of ACSOD, religious leaders, lecturers, doctors, members of the press, colleagues from the humanitarian side, from the UN and the HINGOs. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to be part of this very important and historic workshop organized by the national NGOs, or I can say by ASCOD, one of the strongest civil society platforms in Ethiopia, with 72 members, with excellent coordination platforms, including regular meetings and presence and attendance in all the cluster meetings, including all the coordination platforms from the ECC to area humanitarian team to intercluster coordination meetings and so on and so forth. I'm very, very proud to be part of this group. And today mark another milestone of discussions on how do we move on a transition from humanitarian to development nexus and mapping of resources on recovery. However, on this side, our civilization is on humanitarian response. As most of you are fully aware, we've done quite a lot in the last 2 years, and in particular, since the agreement for peace was signed, over 174 metric tons of supplies have been brought into Tigray by road through the 4 humanitarian corridors, Abala, Alamata, the Maisabri side, Humera. Most of these supplies came through these areas. We have also airlifted over 42 metric tons of supplies by air, and we have reached over 4.2 million people with humanitarian assistance, ranging from food, health supplies, nutrition supplies, NFIs, and so on and so forth, both in IDP sites and host community. However, the caseload remains very, very, very huge, particularly in areas where we can access. For example, the caseload in the central zone alone is over 1.5 million people who need humanitarian assistance. In southern zone, which probably we're looking at almost 1 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. In the southern zone, you have over 400,000 IDPs who are in need of humanitarian assistance. Next door, just not far away from the airport, in Milzad, there are over 3,000 IDPs who have been displaced from Abala, who are currently in need of humanitarian assistance. And transitioning into recovery, the recovery need is very huge. Our colleagues at Mulugeta, from the government side, the Durable Working Solution Group, the Returns Working Group are working assiduously to ensure that people who are returning to their homes have some kind of support. However, we are not there yet. And as most of you are fully aware, people are returning anyway. Since December, I've met people trekking from McNatal to Adwa. I've seen people trekking from Wukro Morai down to Salaklaka. I've seen people trekking when there were no commercial services from Shire into Zeban Gadana, some of them on donkey carts. I've also seen people, when I was in Zalambeza, who have returned to Zalambeza in February. But most of these people are returning to nothing. Yes, we are providing humanitarian assistance, but people need the hospitals to function. The health centers are not functioning. The water resources is not functioning. The schools need rehabilitation. I can go on and on and on and on and on because I've seen it firsthand. Some of the people who have returned, some of them are coming back to hospital. Some of them are coming back to either hospital to look for, health facilities, simply because the health center in McNatal was occupied, needs rehabilitation, and it's not functioning. They have to come back. So this workshop is very important. Thank you, Ascot, for putting this together. We have to be mindful of time and also working together. Failure to act on time and failure to work together will lead to more suffering and to some extent deaths. 2 weeks ago, we have got a report from FATSI, the health center, the reports of neonatal deaths, simply because there are no facilities. So we may need to move fast with the rehabilitation activities, but we have also put our message very clear to the development donors, because we have to push forward for transitioning out of dependency on humanitarian assistance. One of our key acts from the humanitarian side to the development partners is urgent funding for stabilization and peace support for Tigray. And not only in Tigray, but also for the northern Ethiopia as a whole. And then also, our second ask is on urgent funding for support on resilience building, looking at also climate change and others. The third one is urgent focus on addressing structural vulnerabilities, because these structural vulnerabilities have to be addressed for us to transition out of the humanitarian assistance. So I would like to thank Alliance for Civil Society Organization for organizing this very important workshop. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to say a few remarks on what I think on the strategies for humanitarian intervention here in Tigray. So I'm going to focus on strategies. What should be the possible strategies for humanitarian interventions in Tigray? I'm hoping other colleagues will be speaking on resource mapping and issues related to that. First, contextual things. There are 4 general things that we need to understand on the context. I hope everybody around has an idea. The depths of the humanitarian needs, the low trust between the federal government and the regional government, the absence of public institutions here in the region, or the little to none level of efficiency and effectiveness they have on the ground, and the presence of an international community that is risk-averse given the circumstances in Ethiopia. These are the four contextual things that we need to consider. Number one, everybody knows that the destruction in Tigray is so massive and comprehensive. We all know that hundreds of thousands of people are killed. Some bring it up to 1 million people. Others limit it to 600,000, 700,000 people. Figures are not clear, but there is no doubt that hundreds of thousands of civilians have lost their lives in the war that has been running for over 2 years here in Tigray, and still not abating in the real sense. And we all are traumatized. Children have seen atrocious things happening around them. Parents have seen their beloved ones being taken in front of them, facing all sorts of atrocities while they were witnessing in their own eyes. And therefore the whole community is traumatized. Over 3 million people are still in IDP camps, and they are not sure when they're going to make it back to their places. Social infrastructure in Tigray is destroyed. Schools, clinics, if not burned, they are ransacked. And they are ransacked at their core elements. If a school is accessed by any of those forces of aggression, the first to be burned is the registrar of the school, so that the school doesn't have the records of its students. If a clinic is accessed, then the first to be burned is the files of the patients. And if any of the government institutions, be it a court or be it a microfinance institution's office or a bank, the first thing it lost was its documents, its files, so that no institutional remote memory is left there. We all know that over 75% of clean water infrastructure in Tigray is destroyed. And 4.5 million Tigrayans now cannot access clean water as a result of the destruction. We all know that schools are ransacked, destroyed, and they become temporary hosting facilities for IDPs. And over 1 million Tigrayan children and students are out of school since the last 4 years. There were 22 major asphalt road projects that were going on in Tigray. All of them are ransacked, destroyed. Victims of sexual violence are all over. Their numbers are not known. Some talk about over 100,000. I don't know if this is an underestimation, but we don't know the number of children that we got out of rape. And we all understand what that would mean in the society. most factories in Tigray are destroyed. The list is so long, it's so overwhelming. When someone thinks about humanitarian interventions, it's even difficult to count, not to count, even to mention the names of them. There is nothing untouched. We all know that Tigray has never faced such a disaster since history is recorded. I don't know if such a destruction has taken place in any other place in the world within a very short period of time. So that's one important context that we need to understand. The former government institutions were uprooted during the initial months of the war. Many of them were reinstated after a year in the war, after the forces of aggression left most of Tigray. But with little to none capacities and institutions to deliver public services on the ground. So they were essentially doing mobilization stuff from whatever is going to be mobilized from the communities, and not delivering public service because there was no capacity and facility to provide public service on the ground. There was literally nothing in this line. Many might have lost their lives, even the former officials. Many might have moved away. Many might have changed sides. So, when and if the authorities decide to form the interim government that goes up to the Kavali level, it will definitely be starting with little capacity to deliver. And we all know that the whole Western Tigray is still under occupation. And good parts of Northwest Tigray, of Eastern Tigray, and good parts of Southern Tigray are still under occupation. When and if these forces are out, according to the Pretoria Agreement, then it's only then that the interim administration in this place is going to start putting its offices. And therefore, one can see that there is little to none efficiency and effectiveness on the interim government's delivering capacity on the ground. That's another important context we should understand in thinking of strategies. It is from this understanding of the contexts that I try to reflect on some of the possible key strategic issues that need to be considered. The first one is related to financing. Strategies on funding. At federal level, it's now clear that in the short to medium time, it's difficult for Tigray to trust the federal government to funnel funds allocated for the rehabilitation of Tigray smoothly. Because there is no trust between the federal government and the regional government, or the federal government and the people of Tigray. And we all know that it will be, to a certain extent, difficult for the international community or for the donors to bypass the federal government and fund directly to the regional administration or to the people of Tigray here. And therefore, there has to be strategies in how to pass these obstacles without being illegal. First point is the international community or the donors should be able to earmark this emergency and rehabilitation Tigray specifically to Tigray. When they do sign their agreement with the federal government, they have to consider earmarking exactly how much of it and for what purposes has to be assigned to Tigray. And therefore, they can hold the federal government on this as part of their fiduciary responsibilities. Number two, they can focus on program funding rather than block grants and budgetary grants. That could allow them to see, to check on whether the resources they allocated are moving directly to whatever activities they want to take here on the ground. Third would be funding directly UN organizations and other credible international organizations and their partners, their partner national organizations, national non-governmental organizations here directly for their programs of rehabilitation here. Therefore, the trust issue between the federal government and the regional government is bypassed through different mechanisms. This is what they could do at federal level. At Tigray level, in due course, when the entire government comes in place fully, there is a need to reinforce it. There is a need to directly finance it. But this is not going to be possible for the coming short period of time. For the reasons I stated before. It is weak to non-existent. It is to be reinstated. And there are also limitations, even in the trust between the communities and the interim administration that may come, particularly when one sees the Pretoria Agreement, the perception that the people got out of it, and the way it's being implemented. This has created an increasingly issue of trust with the current authorities on the ground. For this reason, in the immediate to short period, there is a need to focus directly in assisting those organizations that have the capability to implement these projects. There are something like 82, as my colleague earlier was talking about, 82 non-governmental organizations here under one association. That's a serious capacity to consider. And there is a need for the inter-government organizations to look into taking the role of coordination, just what organizations like OCHA are taking here locally, up until the required capacity and trust comes in place into those places. Therefore, direct funding to these NGOs could be an ideal intervention. These are issues we could talk about strategies of funding. Second consideration for strategies is prioritization. I mean, the list is so overwhelming. There is literally no NTP that doesn't require assistance. And in the world's people here need assistance. Some of it might not be direct donations, but facilitations. I need to access my bank account. A businessman needs to have a smooth operation from bank to bank. People have lost properties, factories are destroyed, and therefore they need reparation. that has to be replaced. Whatever loans they took from the banks are sitting on their backs. They're still on their names. But whatever they invested through this loan is destroyed. Destroyed not by any outlaw, but by the very government that's in power now. And therefore, something needs to be done. So it's, there is literally no entity, no level of society that doesn't need any intervention. Even the rich need some intervention. Therefore, the issue of prioritization is a very important point to consider in strategizing. So what I say here is prioritize on creating a societal enabling environment. The primary focus should be focus on projects, interventions that have something to do in creating a societal capacity. Accelerated rehabilitation of health services, for example, water infrastructure, is something that addresses everybody's needs. It includes addressing the needs of survivors of sexual violence, survivors of whatever atrocities that has passed. And therefore, things like accelerating the rehabilitation of these infrastructures, health, clinics, water points, should get a priority. Scaling up the physical rehabilitation of disabled people is another important intervention that uplifts the societal capacity to rehabilitate itself. I don't know the number. I'm not sure if anybody has the numbers, but everybody sees that the number of disabled people in Tigray now as a result of this war is so huge. So if you want somebody to survive, the one who has an amputated limb needs to be an artificial appliance. Or she needs to get cranks to walk with, or wheelchairs to move on. Some of them might need some therapeutic assistance so that they will be physically able to do something. So there is a need for a massive physical rehabilitation facilities in Tigray. Unfortunately, we have only one center in Tigray. I don't know if you know it, with a very limited capacity. Right now, if you go there, the appointment for artificial limbs has reached 10 months next December. There are young boys and girls who lost their limbs, who have been checked, who could automatically be fitted with artificial limbs, but who can't get it now because the capacity is not there. And the problem is not with fitting ones. It's not limited with the production of one at one time. It's also related with its maintenance. Once you fit an artificial limb, every 6 months, at most every year, you have to check it, and it had to be refixed to your body. So there is this maintenance. Every one of them should come from whichever part of Tigray to Malala to get his assistance. That's going to be the case. And therefore, there is a need to put as one of the priority issues, expanding the physical rehabilitation capacities. Some can think of school feeding programs as a priority as well. It plays 2 roles. Number one, it encourages parents to send their kids, particularly in the rural schools. Number two, it enables the kids to somehow get their biological needs, which is not fully available here in Tigray, whatever we do. When we say of creating enabling social environments, we can prioritize of the availing of subsidized fertilizers and seeds to the farmers. We're now in March, mid-March. The rainy season is already approaching, the plowing season is already coming. And we have seen what has happened last year. There was reasonably enough rain in all parts of Tigray, but there was no fertilizer at all. As a result, there was no production. And therefore, this should be a priority of the priorities. Can any of you, any of your non-governmental organizations or any of the UN agencies come up with a solution? Can they give the farmers fertilizers and seeds? Can you assist them with farm tools so that there will not be a problem for you next year to come to ask you for food rations? This should be one of the priorities. And another societal enabling environment would be restoring the financial service in Tigray properly, restoring the debit microfinance itself in its full capacity would bring a lot of differences. At the time it was being ransacked and destroyed, the debit had customers of over 400,000 people, and most of its customers are farmers living in the remote areas because they're the ones the most accessible to the remote areas. And they had a deposit of over $100 million at the exchange rate of that time, not this time. That's all for them. And that's all assets of the farmers of Tigray. And therefore, can all the humanitarian organizations, the international community, the donors advocate for this so that peasants can access whatever deposits they have? And or can peasants access loans as they used to previously? So these are the kind of issues that need primary attention in terms of prioritizing things. I'm not speaking of, my list is not comprehensive. I'm simply picking one of the points. The prioritization can go deeper. Someone can say, do you prioritize to re-equip either the hospitals, or you prioritize to rehabilitate the health clinics on the ground, the health extension centers on the ground? That's an issue of priority that could be raised. I would come and say, well, prioritize those clinics. You give those health extension workers a stethoscope, a thermometer, so that they can diagnose the disease of the person. If you can, give them some basic medicines, give them some chloroquine to address some of the most common endemic diseases that happen on the ground. If you can provide them with mosquito nets or the chemicals that you put on the mosquito nets so that they can protect themselves there. If you intervene here, you will definitely intervene on the major chunk of health challenges on the ground. I'm not saying the hospitals should not be assisted, the hospitals should not be reconstructed and re-equipped. They should, but when push comes to shove and when prioritization comes in, the priority should be make sure that the health workers stay in the communities. If they're going to stay there, they have something. They need to have something to eat. And if they stay there, they need to have some little things to support them to the services that they are supposed to provide. Give them a thermometer, a stethoscope, or anything. I'm not a physician. The physicians know it, and they know what the requirements are at the community level health infrastructures. So the prioritization could go on and on. What I'm trying to say here as a general strategic issue is think of prioritization. The problems we have are going to stay with us for the coming, I don't know how many years. So we need to prioritize, and these are some of the issues that I could think of in terms of prioritization. Prioritize and creating a societal enabling environment to those individually focused interventions. Third strategic point, create a conducive environment for the revival of the private sector. That's a strategic intervention. You know, if someone considers the factories that were here in Tigray, they employed over 100,000 people, only the factories. That doesn't include the cottage institutions and the small-scale institutions that were all over. The private sector in Tigray was the major employer, next to farming. So create an enabling environment for it. This could be through different mechanisms. Many of them are destroyed, as we know. We have seen the forces of aggression taking whatever they could take, whatever they could load with them. You know, in the summer of 2021, during the battle in Abergele, where 7 divisions of the ADF were put out of action, and over 200 vehicles were taken over by TDF. We saw the type of loads that they were loaded. Bajads were owned, individual properties, you know, women's decorations from the rural areas, whatever they are, were taken. There was nothing remaining. So that's what we see. So do something. I mean, there are different legal issues. How does restitution take place? How does compensation take place? That's a different story. But for now, create some things. For example, prioritize setting up revolving loan funds for special access for those people who need to reactivate their businesses. There is a shortage of foreign currency, and therefore there must be a facility that's open for this private sector actors to access. So you can create specially designed foreign exchange accounts that are accessible to the private sector in Tigray who have lost their factories, who have lost their fixed assets. That's one of the strategies that we could think. A focused support to civil societies and other strategic areas that we can think. The dynamism in Tigray lies in society rather than the institutions. This energy should be encouraged and enabled. Unfortunately, the federal government we have and the former government we had here have this tendency of controlling civil society organizations rather than empowering them. And therefore, there is a need to address this bottleneck by encouraging to women's empowerment projects, human rights promotion activities, including documenting violations, memorializing victims, and using local, national, and international channels for transitional justice. There is a need to enhance independent media. We don't have it. And we don't have any hope without having an independent media, which could encourage transparency and accountability in the functions of all public institutions. That's strategy number 3 that we can consider. And strategy number 4, there is a need for special assistance focusing specifically to vulnerable groups, including survivors of SDPV, born children out of rape, disabled war veterans, and separated families. Strategy 5 could look into addressing the needs of IDPs for their return. And the primary point in addressing the needs of IDPs is creating an enabling environment for their return. This has to be one of the key advocacy points of the civil society organizations. IDPs left for a reason. For them to return, that reason should be lifted. And therefore, there is a need that all the civil society organizations and the international community as well to advocate for the removal of the foreign and non-NDF forces from the administrative boundary of Tigray, so that the IDPs could return. These are some of the strategic issues that we could think of. I'm hoping to have more time during the Q&A sessions, and I hope you have got a copy of the memo that I wrote a few weeks ago with a colleague on humanitarian priorities, and I will be happy to engage in more discussions in the Q&A session. I thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
So I don't want to repeat the context, the post-war context of Tigray, because it is properly addressed by Mulgeta. So I will directly jump to the interventions. What are the possible interventions during post-war? What are the international experience? What are the national and regional experiences? The political economy of post-war period and the intervention in post-war period is known as triple nexus intervention. What does it mean? Triple nexus intervention means humanitarian assistance, peace-building initiative, and recovery programs or development programs. Every country in the world who undergo post-war activity pass through these interventions. We, as a region, as a country, and as a regional state, in the past two post-war experience, we just exercise the triple nexus interventions. Even in this period, in the third post-war period which we face, we are expected and we are exercising the triple nexus interventions. A successful humanitarian nexus have a positive impact on peace building nexus and recovery nexus. But fortunately or unfortunately, for the past 2 years, we had what you call humanitarian intervention, but it was not successful. It was exercised in a siege. So our experience in humanitarian assistance were below to the standard. Even this situation is continuing after the peace agreement. We'll send we'll have, for example, we'll have planned returning program, but we just tell our people to go without getting monthly food ration. This is the reality what we experience. They will go back to their home. They will not get any food when they return back. So we'll send them from one hell to another hell. The humanitarian situation, intervention in Tigray, in short, is below standard. We will have disabled civilians and veteran disabled. I mean, our experience with veteran disabled. But now we have also civilian disabled who survived drone attacks and heavy artillery attacks. So the new thing in Tigray, the severity of the problem. You could not get civilian disabled because of war. You get because of nature. But in Tigray, because of war, we don't have 10,000s of civilian disabled because of the war. So we'll focus on rehabilitation program. We'll focus on these priority groups, on these vulnerable groups. Focusing on this vulnerable group, we'll have two types of interventions. At household level intervention, including demobilization soldiers and IDPs, disabled, drone survivors, families of the deceased, etc., etc. Refugees, even we don't have refugees returning from Sudan. We are expecting 70,000 refugees who are potential returnees. They will return back to home and they will rehabilitate. So they are in our agenda. We don't have 3 million IDPs, 120,000 GBVs, 25% disabled. We don't know. We'll have and thousands families of the deceased who lost their breadwinners. So 90%, more than 80% of the Tigray people is needy people, vulnerable group. Towns like Rama were severely damaged. Towns like Adaga Hamus are totally ruined, like housing. So we will not be engaged in constructing individual ruined or severely damaged houses. There are small cities reported as severely and totally damaged. So we do have recovery assignment in recovering back to normal activity in these cities or small towns. So the recovery program will be done at 2 levels, at household level and at community level. Infrastructure like schools, clinics, water points, rural roads. In Tigray, 80% are severely damaged or totally damaged. So we need, if we fail to rehabilitate back to normal activity, whatever we inject, different intervention at household level, we could not expect normal life or back to normalcy. So parallel with the intervention at household level, we are expected to engage in community level infrastructure programs. Now we are on the late recovery period. On recovery, there are 3 things to be done: recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. The first door in rehabilitation or in recovery is planned returning program. We'll return IDPs to their original places. So starting from next week, we'll have massive returning program. This program is challenged by logistics and other constraints. So, we are facing like all the challenges what we face in the humanitarian nexus. So we are expecting to start with 150,000 planned returning program. But the good news is most of the IDPs are returning by themselves. They were fed up with the humanitarian assistance. So they opt to go without any minimum accommodation. So there is a huge spontaneous resettlement, returning program. That is a challenge. People will not go to secure area. People will not go with dignity. People, the only thing is, in a spontaneous returning program, the only standard thing is they return voluntarily. Although there is a push factor, that credit is voluntary. Although it's spontaneous, it is voluntary. But it is, it is forced by different push factors. Can we get resources? For example, for the voluntary return program for transportation only, we just request around 4 billion Ethiopian birr. But so far, we didn't get even 100 million. There is donor fatigue. Unless we just design an innovative resource mapping and an innovative program, the Tigray rehabilitation program will be a challenge to us. It will be even a challenge for existence, for survival. So it is good to have, with good strategy, with good resource mapping. So I hope from this workshop we can get some inputs, and we are ready to entertain and to get valuable comments and strategies from this workshop. Thank you.
Presenters, actually. Yeah, I want to brief you the situation of education in Tigray, as I am from Bureau of Education as head. We need to take note of the status of education before the conflict, that we had 2,221 primary schools and 271 high schools, in total 2,492, and 2 teachers' education. The current status of this educational infrastructure, as reported by last year, December, and the data by September 2021, was 90% damage, incomplete and partial. In fact, we had multiple rounds of conflicts after that, and the only difference we could find on the damage is the collapse was in millimeters of particles, and now crashed into micrometers. The entire situation is collapse and crashes. So let's take this note. And by this year, had we opened schools entirely throughout the Tigray, we could have found 2.4 million children in schools, had we really made efforts to mobilize the entire children to schools. And out of this, as earlier presented by AXOT, 1.9 million of these children need package educational assistance to bring them to schools, actually. Be it in disability assistance, in scholastic assistance, school feeding, but the levels might be different and the kinds might be different. But this number is really one of the challenges we could face in the future. And 55,000 teachers and support staff in the educational structure is so far not paid salary for close to 2 years. And imagine what kind of crisis will happen in their family and themselves. And the trauma can be imagined again. Many schools had been used as military camps. Multiple grenades and unexploded ordnance might be existing. And we need really UXO clearance by the so-called, as mentioned by Mulgeta, UNMAS, and so. Now, many schools are occupied by IDPs. So we really need return of IDPs and clearing these schools to reopen schools. What opportunities might have been lost? What learning losses happened in our generation? How many become people with disability out of this crisis? And the level of trauma we faced as community is beyond one that can imagine. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to imagine. So if we have real tools to assess these problems, I think ACSOT and partners should work on these issues. At least we should know the number of people with disabilities, and we can have resources for education to support people with disabilities, for children. At the same time, we are going to have women and girls to be supported in this area. So as a result, I am demanding as Bureau that reinstalling local administration is going to be very, very vital, and people have to advocate for this. Otherwise, we cannot function as Education Bureau to the level of the lowest structure, which is schools. So it's going to be really structural. Education, as you know, is program intervention. So we really need reinstallation of administrations immediately. UXOs shall be cleared, IDPs shall be returned, salary for the teachers and support staff has to be paid, girls and women and people with disability shall be supported enough, and quick repair and temporary learning spaces shall be built actually. This is the quick intervention areas I am mentioning. The rest, mental health and psychological support is critical before starting schooling, because teachers has to heal themselves. They should be healed ahead of giving assignments to heal children. So trainings, art-focused interventions, and financial and material supports in MHPSS is going to be very important. And we demand professional rehearsal trainings for teachers, and peace and security aspects shall be given. So what I missed from the presentations earlier was how to mobilize the public capacity. We focused only on external resources and supports, but also we have public assets to be mobilized and to be changed to problem-solving approach. Yeah, let's recover Tigray and recover back better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll try to make it brief. It's a suggestion because now, as resources coming, we are expecting from the presentations there can be wastage of resources, and then so we may not have a strong government to implement this, and there are varying interests, federal, local, and the international donor organizations. So what I would like to suggest is to make it transparent. For example, ASCOT, whether we have a strong government which monitors or not, ASCOT can be strengthened to monitor whatever money is coming to Tigray, from which sources and how is it being implemented. So ASCOT should be empowered to monitor this first, and then the introduction of technologies, like have a web page that monitors the amount of money that's coming to Tigray, so that the people which are ultimately the beneficiaries, not the government, not the other bodies. So we have to make it very transparent, so that the people can monitor how much money is coming to the people via the webpage. Not only the people, but local implementers also. Local implementers have to know what money is being allocated to which area, to which domain, so that they compete with other NGOs from elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world. So what I would suggest is to have a transparent monitoring mechanism. We have to introduce a web page. So whomsoever is interested in helping Tigray should establish this monitoring mechanism. I see a way out is having a web page that can be a good way for the people.
Some suggestions. I hope you will read between the lines. It may not be clear unless you digest that way. One, let us start with survival strategy via united task force. Forget about politicians, parties, and so on. Focus on the very needy Tigrayans. Second, integral support is needed. Don't only look at the valleys. Integral. By integral, I mean body, spirit, medical, psychological, social, economical, etc. Third, wise usage of resource is needed. Wise. Small or little ways to reach the very needy at grassroots has to get focus, not giant projects. For all, prioritizing system is important. Prioritizing which first, then second, short, middle, and long. Please be careful from the Bermuda cycle. The project consumers. Saving from dependency syndrome has to be part and parcel of our help. For that, program more than projects. Hoping to stand on our feet, not always stretched hand. It is time to ask for support, to support ourselves tomorrow. We have to be very careful. If we remain dependent with syndrome, then the day will come, the supporters will be fatigued. And then where will we remain? Thank you.
Thank you. I think most of the points were addressed. I don't want to repeat on, but I want to raise some issues which could be used as a reminding for ACSOT. It's good to map the resource, but it's also good to map Tigray. The whole Tigray doesn't have a similar level of damage. And we have to approach accordingly. The western part of Tigray may need some sort of solution, and this Mekelle and other cities may need other kind of solutions. So mapping the resource is one important thing. Mapping Tigray itself is also another important thing. And I strongly agree with those who raise the issue of exploiting the human potential. We have seen during the siege massive scholars working with Bureau of Science and Technology and contributing a lot. And part of it was broadcasting, I think, yesterday with Dims Wayane. I think by using this potential human resource, we can also reduce at least by 50% most of our problems in Tigray. For example, one of our most important problems is we don't have a concrete data. And data is power in this era. But we don't have even now the number of GBV survivors. Most of us lack confidence to say this number of women are GBV survivors. But we have technologies. We are not deploying, or we are not using the digital technology to resource or to manage the information or the data. But we have expertise. what I have learned from the movement during the siege was that one. Maybe for the interest of time, I need also to urge to have priorities like Dr. Mulugeta presented. ACSOT should take note of aligning the resources that are mapped today with the priorities. And we have also to bring into the picture big issues that need to be addressed using forums, consortium, or others. I am not aware of that. For example, I suggest we have most important issues that have to be addressed. The issue of GBV is very much important. It's deep-rooted and vast in number. And we have also other issues which were prioritized by the previous presenters. So we have to align the resource with the prioritized problems or agendas, I think. So we have to take care of aligning these things. Maybe final point is this our final meeting or our final gathering? I think
this is the beginning.
Yes, this must be the beginning, and we have to think of how we can keep on working on such issues.
So thank you so much. The prevalence of disability in Tigray is very increasing. It needs special attention. Why don't more donors focusing on disability? I have this question for those UN agencies, CSOs, and government body. Why the donors on disability issues are very low? Because we know the disability issues as a right is forgotten, or no one gives special attention, forgotten and ignored. Our brothers and sisters with disability are suffering because of lack of food, because of lack of medicine, because of lack of assisted device and trauma. So this is as we mentioned before, it's like as community level. It needs more attention.